Hi guys, my name is Catherine Pabone. I am your host on Z-Files podcast, where we bring your curiosity to our conversation. Today I have a special guest, Charles Keppler. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, my name is Charles Keppler. I'm running for Pocono Township Commissioner. I'm running for Commissioner to try to protect the natural beauty and splendor of Pocono Township and to try to build a more vibrant and lively community for all the residents who live there.
That's good. So you recently challenged the Board of Remote Access to meetings. We were just briefly talking about it, like having access and like filming the meetings forward. What's one simple, no excuse transparency policy you would implement on day one if elected?
I mean, there are a lot of things the board could be doing better to try to be more transparent. For anyone who doesn't know, recently the Pocono Township Board of Commissioners rolled back the ability for people to dial into their meetings. Now, I feel that it's a right for citizens to be able to attend their meetings, and having them only available in person in this day and age, especially when local media is not as robust as it used to be. There aren't a lot of local reporters who are, out on the scene, out on the beat, attending these meetings, writing it up in the paper. So it falls to citizens to be the journalists in that case. But a lot of people don't have time to attend these meetings. The Pocono Township meetings, they run for 3 hours, sometimes more. I've got a 3-year-old son at home. I would much rather be home spending time with him, but somebody has to hold these people accountable when they're making decisions that impact all of our lives. So, day one, if I were elected, I would reinstate the call-in option. They said it was only for COVID, but, again, in this day and age, it just makes sense. I would also like to see the videos recorded and posted on Facebook Live, on YouTube, live streamed so that people can attend them. People are curious about what's going on in their towns. The attendance might not be huge, but it's also good for posterity because people want to be able to look back and see what was going on in their meetings. We shouldn't just rely on, the meeting minutes that come out of the meeting, based on whatever's recorded. We want to have, actual recordings of the meetings, and you shouldn't have to submit a FOIA request to get them. They should be publicly available online, whether it's on Facebook, YouTube, directly on the township website through a link, however they do it. But, it's not a difficult thing to do. Anyone can do it. And I actually made a Facebook post earlier today, and I hope anyone listening to this will go and share it. I'd like to start live streaming the Pocono Township Commissioner meetings on my Facebook page. I need 100 followers to be able to start a Facebook live stream, so I hope anyone listening today will follow my Facebook page at Charles Keppler for Pocono Township Commissioner and try to help me get over that hump so I can try to hold the Pocono Township Board of Commissioners to account.
So even if not elected, you still wish to attend the meetings and live stream them?
Yeah, I attend every meeting. I try to make it every week that I can. I think I've made it to just about every meeting for the last few months, since at least November. I think it's important to be there to hear what's going on, especially if you're running for a position like Township Commissioner. There's so much that goes on at a township level, and it's important, if you're going to run for a position, to be in the know about what's going on in your town. So, I don't want to be running from a place of ignorance. I want to know exactly what's going on, and I think in an election year, it's the right of every citizen to know exactly what's going on. So if I can try to bring a little transparency to the process, let people know what's going on in their town, that's what I'm going to do. So I hope people will follow my page, Charles Keppler for Pocono Township Commissioner, so that we can work together to hold the board accountable and to make sure that the voting public is aware of their options and aware of what's going on.
And with the current administration and the board, like that's Pocono Township,
Mm-hmm.
What are some issues that you would say is going on that most residents might not be aware of, but as you go to the meetings,
Mm-hmm.
what is something that you took notice of?
Well, something that I noticed fairly early on when I started attending the meetings is that they were pushing this policy. It's called the LERTA policy. So it's a tax incentive for businesses to come in and build in a community. So basically the way it works is if you want to come in and spend $1 million developing in Pocono Township, and it's $1 million minimum, any improvements you make on a property, you're only going to pay a fraction of the taxes on those improvements for the next 5 to 10 years. So the first year you pay 10% of the value of the improvement, the second year you pay 20%, then 30%, then 40%, out to 10 years, or 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 if it's the 5-year LRTA, depending on where you're building. Pocono Township decided, usually these policies are meant to revitalize areas that are economically depressed. Think Allentown, where the main street there is kind of run down, and they really need more investment coming into the township to try to revitalize it.
Right.
Pocono Township doesn't have that problem. We've got Great Wolf, we've got Camelback, we've got big businesses like Sanofi already operating there. We don't need to be incentivizing more big $1 million projects to come into our town, and especially the way that the commissioners have done it with the $1 million minimum. First of all, the only businesses we're going to get coming into our town are big corporate businesses. That's the only one who's going to be able to spend $1 million. Small businesses, they're not going to be able to spend $1 million. If you want the LRTA to be used to try to, give small businesses a leg up, give them an opportunity to, improve their business. Like the example I like to give is, we've got 3 Wawas opening up along 611 between Tannersville and Stroud Township. You think all 3 of those Wawas are still going to be there in the next 5 years, especially with all of the other gas stations that are along through that stretch? What's going to end up happening is the smaller owner-operator gas stations that are run by people who live right here in our town, they're going to get driven out of business by these big corporate Wawas that come in, set up shop, and are able to undercut the businesses that are already here because they're getting this LRTA tax break that the legacy businesses aren't getting. I want to see, if we're going to use a LRTA policy, I'd like to see them dial down that $1 million minimum to something more reasonable, something that, is achievable by a small business owner. Say one of these smaller business owners wants to, put in an electric car charger at their station so they can compete with Wawa Tesla superchargers. Pocono Township is right along Route 80, like a vital stretch coming out of New York City. There are a lot of people there who drive electric cars. I drive an electric car myself. I commute an hour to work every day, and I like to save on gas. A lot of people are moving in that direction. So the idea that, the sort of businesses we're attracting are, a lot of gas stations too. That's the other thing about the LRTA policy. It incentivizes riskier businesses too, because they know they're going to be getting this tax break for the next 5 or 10 years. If they can come in, set up shop, and make their money back in that 5 or 10 years before their LRTA runs out, that's great for them, and then they can shut the business down. You drive around the Poconos, Pocono Township and, Monroe County more broadly, you see a lot of, abandoned buildings, a lot of abandoned resorts, things like that. And, we kind of have this boom-bust cycle here, where every few years a whole bunch of new businesses come in, they open up, there's all this growth, and then all of a sudden there's a crash and it all goes away. And who has to clean it up? It's us, the residents. The only people who really seem to benefit are the people that are doing the construction on these projects. People like my opponent, Commissioner Brian Wynot in this race. He himself owns a construction company. In fact, the LRTA policy that Pocono Township passed, they had to roll the policy back because he voted in favor of it when he owns properties that are affected by the policy. It's a conflict of interest, and I don't think people should be serving on the board when they have those sorts of conflicts of interest, and they definitely shouldn't be pushing policies that directly benefit them, whether it's benefiting them by providing tax relief to their properties that they own, or if it's by incentivizing people to come and contract with them to build for them $1 million minimum. That would be a big project for for his construction company. I don't think that those are the sorts of incentives we want on our Board of Commissioners. We want the people who should be representing us should be, regular people. People like me, I think. I'm just a regular guy. I work a 9-to-5 job, and I want to build a town that is good for regular people, good for regular working people.
And what about people who are ambitious, where they want to see the Poconos, like Pocono Township, for instance, and what resides inside, prosper? Like, how would you respond to that, like regarding the just regular working 9-to-5 people?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I'm a young guy. I'm 28 years old, and I feel like a lot of people my age are, they're really struggling right now. They're having trouble putting food on the table. They're having trouble finding housing, and most of all, I think they're having trouble kind of finding their place in the world. In this day and age, a lot of the community structures that people have relied on for hundreds of years to provide them a sense of structure, a sense of purpose in their lives. A lot of that stuff has moved online, and that sense of community, that sense of closeness that we have to our neighbors has kind of gone away.
Yeah.
And I want to see a community built up that is more interconnected, more personally involved, and a big part of why I'm running is because I want to inspire a generation of other young leaders to get involved and to stand up for what they think is right. A lot of people are hesitant to get involved in politics because they think it's not going to make them friends, or it's going to end up making them more enemies than friends. But since I moved out here, I've made a lot of friends by getting involved and talking about what I'm passionate about and trying to make a difference however I can. And I think that that's a powerful message to send. If people get out there and they put themselves out there and they fight for what they think is right, people will like them, and people will come and want to be a part of that movement and a part of that energy. I think it's important to be trying to build more community involvement. I think in particular our fire department, they really need more volunteers. I think finding ways to attract more volunteers to the fire department is really important. I think more people want to get involved in their community, and a lot of times they just don't know how. And I think trying to communicate that in a way that reaches more young people and just more people in general is really important. Pocono Township actually gets space on every digital billboard in town, and I think that we should use that space to put up advertisements to sign up for our fire department. The team at the Pocono Township Fire Department, they just set up a brand new website. They've got a new Facebook page. They've revamped their social media presence. And now all we need is some way to funnel people to those resources so they can learn about how to get involved, to join the auxiliary, to try to join the fire department proper. Pocono Township's fire department is right in the heart of Monroe County. And they respond to townships all around us because of mutual response agreements. So a strong Pocono Township Fire Department is a strong Monroe County fire response. Furthermore, with community, I think it's important to have places for people in all different stages of their life. My wife and I, we're at a stage of our life where we have a 3-year-old son at home, so we have a single family home. But a lot of younger people, they're looking for apartments where they can move in here and start a family and put down roots. There aren't a lot of affordable apartments in Pocono Township. And for older folks, my grandfather lives over in a single family home in Hamilton Township. And there isn't really anywhere for him to go. He's getting older. My grandmother passed away just a few years ago, and he's well, it's all right. But it's getting to a point where he needs a place to go, where he can be, taken care of. He's getting to an age where he's having more trouble taking care of himself and getting out to the grocery store himself, and making sure that our community has those sorts of, elder care facilities and, places for older people to go, where they can still have community and still be close to other people their own age so they can interact and, stay socialized. It's hard when, you're an older gentleman and you can't drive as well as you used to, and you can't get out, and there aren't a lot of places for you to go and, spend time with other people. So I think it's important to build those sorts of communities and build those sorts of communal spaces that give people places to go in all stages in their lives, and interact with each other.
One community event we just had, which we both were at, the Pick Up the Poconos, or Poconos Pick Up. When you say community events, things like that would be something, because you talked also online about litter and dumping being out of control. So when you mentioned the fire department, community, and things like picking up the Poconos and dumping being out of control, very productive community events, how would you keep pushing for more stuff like that? Like you mentioned also the advertisement spaces.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to have all sorts of events like that bring the community together. Another great event that was recently held, I think in conjunction with, I don't know the exact organization, but it was an organization that works in Monroe County for at-risk youths and to help foster parents and help find foster children homes. They sponsored an egg hunt in Pocono Township, and they had all sorts of resources there, opportunities to donate to children who are needy. They also were giving out things like naloxone there, which is incredible because I don't know how many people know, but naloxone is a miracle drug that helps to prevent overdose deaths. It's something that I believe that every person should keep in their car because you never know when you're going to be able to save a life. And handing that out to residents at an event like that is great because again it fosters that sense of community responsibility. You might not be addicted to drugs and you might not know anyone who is addicted to drugs, but you never know when you're going to come upon someone who is. And I think you may not think that people who use drugs are worthy of your care or your interest or your compassion, but I do, and I think everyone is deserving of compassion. And I think handing out naloxone for free to anybody who would want it, to keep it, and I would encourage anybody who is listening to this to go out and get it. And I believe Monroe County is now giving it out to anyone who wants it. But those sorts of things that encourage people to think about their community and think about ways that they can make it better. That was really cool that they hold the egg hunt, but then they're also doing that extra step of giving people ways to help their community and to prevent overdose deaths. Marrying those two things, I think is a great way to foster that sort of sense of community that I think is so important to building strong community ties.
Right. And then when you were mentioning like building families and more residents coming in here and being able to have roots here, one of the major things is rental prices like not being as affordable.
Yeah.
And as a commissioner, you help oversee zoning laws. How do you balance the need for economic development and like with a rental, like those apartment complexes being built, with protecting open spaces in the environment as well, and affordability?
Well, Pocono Township is in a really advantageous position. There are a lot of really great things about Pocono Township that would make it an excellent place to live with the right kinds of investments and the right kind of zoning and planning. Right in the heart of Pocono Township, Tannersville, you have the Crossings Mall, or I think it's called the Pocono Premium Outlets now, TLC Park, a grocery store, a pharmacy, several fast food restaurants, and a ton of other recreational things right in that very small stretch between the Pocono Premium Outlets and just about the Wawa there. Pocono Township has sidewalks coming in through that entire area. They received a grant from the state. I believe they're working on it now. And 715 is also being realigned right at that intersection, which is going to help massively with the traffic problem. I think a great way to try to improve the situation for housing and for development in Pocono Township is to turn that area, that center portion of Monroe County, that center portion of Pocono Township into our real downtown area. And by doing that, we'll keep downtown. A big part of the problem that we're seeing now is that we're getting sprawl, and policies like the current LRTA policy that any commercial zone is receiving this LRTA, it's incentivizing people to build out in the sticks where property values are lower. We should try to consolidate our building in our downtown commercial area.
Where they can build,
Yeah, right there in Tannersville. That's where we should want our commercial building going on. We shouldn't want it out next to people's houses, out in the residential neighborhoods. We want it in the focused downtown area. Now you may be thinking, there isn't a lot of space there. There's already a lot of business there. Where are these businesses going to go? Well, Pocono Township Town Hall is moving. They have that lot there behind the ice cream shop. They're going to be moving right around the corner, and so that lot is going to be, pretty much unused. So what I would like to do is turn that into a public parking lot. Making that a public parking lot would provide people a place to park so that once the sidewalks go in, people can walk between different places in their community.
With meters?
Huh?
With meters?
Potentially with meters, but probably not to start. It could probably be free at the start because, we're not going to have a lot of traffic in the parking lot initially, but we're planning for the future here. For a while the parking lot probably wouldn't get used much, but once it's there, developers are going to start thinking, we don't need our own parking lots at every single building in this area. A lot of the space, a lot of our commercial development space is taken up with parking lots. If you look along that stretch through Tannersville of 611, you see it's like parking lot, business, parking lot, business. If we had a public parking lot where people could park, sidewalks so you could get to the businesses, every business wouldn't need their own parking lot. And most of these parking lots are empty most of the time. If businesses could build closer together, it would prevent the sprawl that we're seeing now. If every business needs their own parking lot, they sprawl and they get out into the nature and they start disturbing our protected waterways. They start preserving our marshlands, or they start interfering with our marshlands. We want to try to keep that consolidated, and by providing public parking, providing pedestrian infrastructure, we can support that sort of development. We can give developers an opportunity to build closer together, build denser, and prevent the sprawl that is hurting our downtown area. Building closer together, they could build, I know a popular type of building that's going up all over the country are 5-over-1s, where it's one story of retail businesses with 5 stories of apartments above them. Something like that would be, a huge boon to our township because it would attract those young residents. We're right off of Route 80. We're, about an hour from New York City here. Yeah. I moved out here from New Jersey because I was fleeing the high taxes. A lot of people are going to be doing the same in the next few years. And they're going to be looking at places like Pocono Township as a great place to put down roots and start families. But they need places to go. And right now, Pocono Township has a 2-acre minimum if you want to do any residential building. That's no way to build affordable housing for a younger generation of people that don't have the finances to afford a big multi-acre single-family home. We want to be giving people opportunity. Again, it's all about providing spaces for people in different stages of their lives. Apartments for younger people to put down roots, single-family homes for that middle area, and then retirement communities and places for older folks to go where they still have a sense of community and they still have a place in their hometown. I don't think anyone should ever have to be driven out of their hometown because there isn't a place for them there. We need to have places for everybody. And I think this sort of smart development is a good way to do it.
You mentioned leaving New Jersey because of high property taxes and just high taxes in general. How, if elected as commissioner, what would be your take on taxes? Would you be pro raising them, or would you try to lower taxes?
So taxes are difficult because prices are going up right now. Everything is getting more expensive, and I know a big struggle for people is figuring out how they're going to pay that tax bill. Pocono Township has relatively low taxes compared to the rest of the county, but they're still high and people are still struggling. So I think a great way to try to offset the cost of residents of their taxes is to provide them services at a lower cost than they could get them otherwise. So you mentioned the trash pickup before. One of the big policies that I'm pushing for is public trash pickup. Right now in Pocono Township, almost every resident has their own private trash pickup. You drive around Pocono Township, there's a lot of dumping going on, there's a lot of littering going on, and I think a big part of the reason for that is that it's difficult and expensive to get rid of trash. It costs me over $360 a year for trash pickup with Whitetail, and to drive out to the Penn Argyle dump, if you go with even one bag of trash, it costs you $40 to get in. It's outrageous, and no wonder people are choosing to dump their trash instead of paying to get rid of it. It costs a fortune. So what can we do about that? Well, in Pocono Township, we should be publicly funding our trash pickup. Pocono Township will get a better rate than we're able to get on our own. If we are able to do every house in a community or every house in, my idea would be to break the township up into zones that are roughly the size of the market share of all the garbage companies we have now. So instead of, we have 4 or 5 different garbage companies coming down our road every week, one from Whitetail, one from another company, one from a third company. That does a lot of extra damage on our road because garbage trucks are heavy. That tends to do a lot more damage to the roads, and it's a lot more fuel burn and a lot more crews that these garbage companies have to pay for. One truck could do our entire neighborhood, and it would be a lower cost to the garbage company because they benefit from economies of scale. You want to try to, provide businesses with, ways to lower their costs. And if they're not stopping at every other house, they can stop at every single house. That brings their costs down. So if Pocono Township were to pay for garbage pickup for the residents through taxes, now they wouldn't have that $360 expense. It would be paid for through taxes. Now taxes may go up a little bit, but it's not going to be $360. So you're getting a net positive there. You know, if the township is able to say get it for $150, $200 a household rather than $360 per household for trash pickup, that's a net benefit for the residents. So, you know, I don't want to say that, you know, raising taxes isn't the right thing to do. You know, we need to be able to fund our police department. We need to be able to fund our public works. We need to be able to fund sewer extensions and things like that make people's lives better. But if we're going to be raising taxes, we should give people their money's worth. If taxes have to go up, you know, they should get something for it. We shouldn't be going to the residents hat in hand and saying, oh, I'm very sorry, but, you know, taxes are going up. What's changing? Well, nothing, you know. No, you know, we should be saying, you know, if taxes have to go up, well, we're going to be providing you trash service now. We're going to make it worth your while. So, you know, that's my philosophy on taxes. You know, if they have to go up, make it worth people's while and show that the government is using that money effectively. You know, make it so that the residents understand where those tax dollars are going.
It comes with the transparency.
Exactly.
So when people look back a few years from now, if you were elected, what's one thing you hope that they say changed for the better?
I mean, you know, I think trash pickup is a huge thing. I think transparency is a huge thing. Having meetings available to be attended, you know, digitally and archived so that people can go back and watch them.
What's
you know,
one thing you want to be known for? Though?
What's one thing I want to be known
There's
for?
so many ideas you have, but if you could just really think of one thing.
If there's one thing, I think it's bringing back a sense of community to Pocono Township. You know, I talked before about, you know, building that strong downtown area, that interconnected area with sidewalks, where the mall, the park, the parking lot, for everyone's communal use, businesses closer together, so we stop the sprawl that is, you know, again, hurting and damaging the nature that, you know, we all hold so dear. You know, a big part of why I moved out here is because, you know, the Pocono Mountains are beautiful. Pocono Township is the jewel of its namesake, the Pocono Mountains. You know, and I want to keep it that way. And, you know, I want, when my son grows up, I want him to be able to, you know, drive down there and walk around Pocono Township and say, like, this is a beautiful place. You know, I love it here because there are things to do, there are things to see, and, you know, there's a community here that I can interact with. You know, I can walk around between these businesses and talk to the shop owners and, you know, feel that sense of community that right now I feel is, if not lacking, you know, is kind of, you know, kind of languishing because we're all so disconnected. I want to provide more, I want to just provide more ways for people to, you know, have that sense of community that I think is just so important to civic involvement and to, you know, to caring about your community.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, you know, I said it a few times now, but I hope anybody listening will follow me on Facebook at Charles Keppler for Pocono Township Commissioner and share my post about getting people to, you know, to follow my page so that I can start live streaming the Pocono Township Commissioners meetings. I want to make sure that in this election year, every resident has the opportunity to attend a meeting, whether it's virtually or in person, so that they can understand what is going on in Pocono Township and they can try to, you know, understand who they're voting for and, you know, what the people they're voting for stand for.
Thank you so much. That was really great. Like, you had so many great ideas. Well, my name is Catherine Pavon. I'm your host of Zay Files Podcast, and today we got Behind the Ballot with Charles Keppler running for Pocono Township Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.